Everyone, how are you? I want to welcome you out to the DC Cybersecurity Professionals virtual meetup. Today we have Mark Danner of Intellectmap to provide a presentation on cybersecurity training with emphasis on scaling a CIA methodology with AI. It's sure to be a lot of fun, very educational. At any point, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask. All right, so without further ado, I want to introduce Mark Danner.
Hey, thanks, Tyrone, for that introduction, and really glad to be here today. Feel free to jump in at any time with questions or pushback, and even if you want to share a story of your own, just jump right on in. Let me begin with a question. Have you ever been in a training situation where you thought, I know this already. Do we really have to sit through an hour of this? I could teach this class. Or how about the opposite, realizing with growing alarm, I don't have the foggiest idea about what this guy's talking about. I think I signed up for the wrong session. Or what about the computer-based training scenario, which is more like, oh, I've got an inbox that's piled high, I've got deliverables, and now this mandatory training, I'm just going to brush through this as fast as I can so that HR can check the training box and my manager get off my back about my not having taken the training. Well, I've been in all these situations and they're painful and unnecessary. A different approach to training is needed, and I think it's one that needs to involve the whole person in the context of their work. It needs to assess their existing knowledge, and it needs to draw them into what I call the adventure of knowledge discovery. I mean, this is true for any knowledge exchange, right? From training and education to briefings and lectures, even exchanges among friends and colleagues. Here's a story about what I mean. And when it was told to me, it wasn't a pleasant exchange. It took place in Santa Monica a while back when I and the management team of what is today Go Secure were practicing our pitch for a potential investor in front of the chairman of the board, William Fallon, Admiral William Fallon, a retired U.S. Navy admiral and wartime commander of the U.S. military's Central Command. At the end of our pitch, Fallon jumped to his feet with irritation and declared that we needed to take a page from President George W. Bush's briefing style, who Fallon had watched scold briefers saying two words, faster, funnier. Now, believe me, it took me a while before I could appreciate Bush's demand, because it gets right back to what makes knowledge more memorable and information relevant and sticky. Faster, funnier was Bush's way of saying, listen, I'm not connecting. This doesn't seem relevant. It's in one ear, out the other. You can just get to the point, please. I want to know what's important for me. But here's the problem. There are some huge challenges when it comes to delivering faster, funnier cybersecurity training for the entire enterprise, from new interns to executives in the C-suite. Here are four problematics that cybersecurity training must contend with. Number one, it's a question of numbers. Every person across the enterprise needs training. No one is exempt, but some people need it more than others. And this combined with the fact that the educational process never stops because the threatscape is constantly evolving, and so education must continue. Number two, subject matter. This is complex stuff. I mean, cyber technology that's being exploited or weaponized in the broad world of cyberspace is not easy to understand for most people, and it's really only understood by the subject matter experts, the wizards. Number three, relevance. The value proposition of cybersecurity education is not really immediate for a lot of people for training. I mean, that at least it's not particularly compelling until it's too late. That was a huge problem at CIA, since officers would often push back saying, gosh, we're involved in operations. We don't have time for training. And I've seen it in the commercial world too. People are already busy enough and stressed with the work they have. And training in a domain that's not their area of specialization can really seem irrelevant. And then the biggest challenge, number four, psychology. I mean, building security awareness in terms of threats and vulnerabilities isn't appreciated at the psychological level by most, in the sense that every person comes to view cyberspace as, at least they should, view it as including a combat zone with an entire ecosystem of really nasty and malicious characters operating alongside the good guys. But they don't have that view. I'll give you an example. When I train folks, I challenge them to just imagine, bring to mind the face of a hacker. Just try and put a face on these threat actors. I mean, you can do it for sports stars, Hollywood personalities, and politicians, but we can't even imagine a face of a hacker. And that's the problem at the psychological level. So as a trainer and security coach at Intellectmap, I need a methodology that'll allow me and my team to face these challenges effectively and have the potential to generate some strong learning outcomes for my clients, whether they have 60 or 6,000 employees. And so this is where my 15 years with the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency's Directorate of Operations comes into play. And I'd like to add, and I don't say it often, but people ask me, so where did you work in the Directorate of Operations? And a couple of the places I spent time in was in the Information Operations Center, where computer operations and human intelligence are conducted, and also in the Counterintelligence Center, fighting the information operations of the bad guys. The essence of human intelligence collection is being able to find the right people at the right time to provide high-value information to U.S. government decision makers. And acquiring these sources, or assets as we call them, requires a highly refined, repeatable, tested, and proven method, which is known as the recruitment cycle. That approach to recruiting assets, and we never use the word spies, was ingrained in young trainees throughout the course of the most intensive and lengthy training offered by any U.S. government agency, and that's known as the operational certification training. And then it's applied continually throughout foreign field assignments and even headquarters desk assignments. I want to walk you through this cycle and share with you why I think it's so relevant to the cybersecurity training that I do, and how the cycle can be transformed into a new way of building security awareness, and how there is one weakness that needs to be overcome. So the recruitment cycle is described by a simple acronym, SADR: spotting, assessing, developing, and recruiting. And the first one is pretty basic, spotting. In the spy world, everything we do is trying to identify a potential source who can provide access to high-value intelligence for U.S. national security. And this is such an important function that the CIA even created an entire job category of targeting officers, who are known as the hunters and detectives of CIA. They are the targeters who identify the people, the relationships, and organizations that the agency needs to focus on. And I'm proud to say that I played a small role in encouraging the creation of this career path. From spotting, we go to assessing. That's where the individual that we spotted is looked at to see if they have the personality, the character, the access, and trustworthiness to be a source. At CIA, that can involve the work of many different kinds of officers, from targeters to counterintelligence officers, from psychologists to scientists, and of course the frontline case officers themselves. I once even used for assessing somebody the services of a graphologist, a handwriting expert. And let me tell you, their insights were astounding and very helpful. Developing is the third part of the SADR recruitment cycle. And it's the art of bringing a person along to grow in trust, and then to want to help you, to be committed, to come to believe in a cause, and to prepare them psychologically, materially, or morally to accept the work. And that can be of significant risk to themselves. And then finally, there's recruitment, the R, where all that prep work comes down to getting the individual to really accept to work with you. The recruitment pitch could involve months and months of work. It can be very discreet, and it can leverage everything else that I mentioned. It can leverage signals intelligence collected by NSA computer hackers and eavesdroppers. It can use allies intelligence service reporting, can use open source research and deep ongoing reflection and judgment on the part of the recruiting officer. But it all comes down to, I have to make a pitch and the target has to believe me. Some recruiting pitches are very soft and CIA's hand remains hidden. Other times the risk is huge and the CIA's involvement must be made clear and obvious. Needless to say, the recruitment cycle is used by every other capable and effective intelligence agency in the world because it works. So how does the recruitment cycle apply to cybersecurity training today? And to answer that, we first need to see where we are with training. Currently, the cybersecurity training industry has essentially a one-size-fits-all approach, right? I mean, there are many flavors and colors of training options, from huge libraries of phishing templates to animated videos that are quick views, short quizzes too, not to mention the colorful dashboards that you can have at your disposal to run all these campaigns. But here's the issue. The training issue has commoditized its services and its products, where the products are more and more similar, and the decision to acquire the service essentially comes down to who's the cheapest. Or as Gartner's 2019 computer-based security awareness training Magic Quadrant report noted, the current pricing environment feels like a race to the bottom. The one-size-fits-all approach is the opposite of the personalized approach. And the personalized approach is just fine if my client is the COO of a company or a handful of individuals, but an entire company? When I joined Intellectmap last summer, Ronan Sorensen, the CEO and founder, and a friend of mine, challenged me with a question about cybersecurity training and how my background would fit into his vision of a different way of doing training. So the question was as simple as it was overwhelming. How do you find inside a company the weakest human links in the complex security chain? Who are the persons most in need of training, and in what areas of security awareness do they need particular help? My initial response was that I needed to spend time inside the company, meeting all kinds of people, talking to them, asking them questions, probing their knowledge, holding small training sessions, assessing the company's security posture, learning about what information and data the company considered high value, who had access to that data, and on what networks and devices. Well, that sounds great, Ronan said, but there's an obvious problem: time and scale. We're not the CIA that can take months to assess an individual. And worse, your approach doesn't scale rapidly across a lot of clients. And here's where Ronan brought me into what he'd been developing over the last 15 years at Intellectmap. And I got to say that finally the light went off in my head. There is a rapid and effective way to assess a large number of people's security awareness, and do so using machine learning and artificial intelligence. I know AI is a vast domain, and today everyone is talking about it. But long before AI was a buzzword, Ronan was exploring how machine learning could map an individual's thought processes. Ronan had even received a patent in 2010 for developing his method and system of organizing information based on human thought processes. Applying this use of AI to cybersecurity training was the next logical step. He had the engine, and now he needed the content that the engine could deliver, and the coach who had the credibility to work with the weak links the AI engine would spot. And that's where I and my background came in. Now, it became possible to scale across the enterprise and do so with my knowledge and experience of the CIA's recruitment cycle. This was a real thrilling discovery for me, not the least of which was the pleasure it gave that we could do it in a very effective way and that we were real innovators. Nobody else in the industry was doing this. So here's how it works. First, we needed to target everyone in the company, from the CEO to the newest hire, to assess their existing level of knowledge across the whole spectrum of cybersecurity awareness. And we could do this with an AI-powered written assessment that includes a set of questions that I developed. The assessment also collects information about the individual's position and access to proprietary information, which then allows us to add a risk weight to their assessment score based on how they self-identify. Within a very short time, I'm able to go into a client and assess the existing knowledge and awareness of its entire staff. I can quickly spot who is the weakest link in the security chain across multiple domains of cybersecurity, not just the usual ones of email and malware, but also information classification, the dark web, and hackers, and incident response, just to name a few. So now the relevance of the CIA's recruitment cycle was energized and able to be scaled. Because after the assessment, it was time to develop the D, new knowledge and awareness. I could develop my clients through some traditional methods, sure, and we do that. We're using engaging videos involving subject matter experts talking about these domains and delivered to my learners across any web-based platform. But we're adding an AI twist, because after they watch the videos and absorb that learning that I've curated, always asking myself whether what they're watching is really going to hit them as learners, including anybody who's coming into it just thinking, I want to get this training over with. I engage them right away at that assessment process with the AI engine, and we're mapping their thought process as they're being served up questions about the videos they watched. So now each learner is going to have a different approach to how they're taking the quiz, and you can see that in the results that come out of those quizzes. In fact, it was a fascinating process for me to develop the content for the quizzes and then see how this content was digested by Ronan's AI algorithms into these personalized quizzes that assess in real time how the learner was performing. So, for example, I'm even able to identify how long somebody is spending on the answers to the quizzes, their dwell time, because that tells me a lot about how they're approaching the training. Are they just clicking through it? Are they taking it seriously? And this is where I, as a coach, can come in, as I've now been able to identify the weakest links scaled across the enterprise. I've been able to identify those who are struggling, those who need more engagement. I can send them an email. I can do a phone call and follow up with them. I can have human contact. It's not just a machine that they're engaged with. I can share additional knowledge. I'm able to motivate them. Some of them at the end of our conversation say, hey, I want to take that module over again. I find that really cool. At the end of the training cycle, and that happens over the course of several months and across 13 different domains of cybersecurity, we then take the learner back to the same AI-powered assessment they took in the first place. This time they get to see the answers. And the AI engine then is able to show us that positive change in their awareness, comparing the original assessment with the one after all their training. So developing a learner's knowledge about cybersecurity also means moving them into the R of SADR, recruiting. Because ultimately, I want to recruit the learner to take seriously in their work and their personal life the realities of cyber threats, and to value their role as a link in the security chain that will continually be tested for its weak links by a very hostile ecosystem of malicious actors. I believe that even a short 5-minute phone call or a friendly email to specific individuals who need that touch point, and leveraging the knowledge that I gained from the AI assessment and quiz engines, that can play a critical role in moving training from a box checking exercise to a potential adventure in learning. And I've seen this happen many times where a learner is really appreciative for that contact, that reach out, because they know me from the very start of the training, and they also feel comfortable to push back or ask probing questions about topics. So my ultimate goal in this training is to develop a new security mindset on the part of my clients. Some of you are probably familiar with Bruce Schneier's work on the subject, and he's done more than anyone to explain why having a security mindset is so important. I used to actually share his books on security with other CIA officers and with officers in our allied intelligence agencies because Bruce really gets it. This is a mindset that can be developed, and it means learning how to think about how things can be made to fail, how they can be exploited. In my training, I often share with my learners a couple of photographs. One is of the double glass doors you see there and an ATM machine. With the security mindset, I look at those doors in a different way. And this was introduced to me when I was doing business consulting, and a friend of mine from the office and I were returning from lunch, and he said, "Hey, would you like to open the doors without your card key?" I said, "How are you going to do that?" And he said, "I'll use the cardboard key." And he went to the nearby trash room and grabbed a piece of cardboard, slipped it through the gap between the two doors, and waved it around high up enough to trigger the inside motion detector, and boom, the doors were unlocked. And I was telling that to one of my learners who's a senior executive, and he interrupted me and said, I know that trick too. I've used it before. Now that's somebody who has a security mindset. Another example of that mindset is how I look at an ATM machine. And I always think about, hey, how can it be broken into? Is there a way to attach a card skimmer to that machine? These are just two examples of how security mindsets could be grown if you expose a person to this way of looking at things. One thing that I learned at CIA is that recruitments don't always work. No matter how much of an effort was spent on the recruitment cycle, there'll always be persons who turn it down, who walk away, and who don't want to take the risk. This is the same with learning new information. In fact, the CIA leadership and development programs that I was involved with and the Leadership Academy showed that, and they took a lot of polling of officers, they showed that between 15 to 20%, are not really engaged to learn. They've already got the answers, so there's nothing to learn. They're the ones who sit in training classes with their arms crossed and they roll their eyes, they're disengaged because they've got better things to do. Well, it's the same with cybersecurity training and the SADR recruitment cycle methodology, because it allows me to spot the non-learners pretty quickly. I mean, running through an assessment in an unreasonable amount of time, or even refusing to take the assessment, clicking through the quiz answers in 2 seconds, or the tone of voice on the phone during a personal coaching call, all that makes it pretty evident to me how somebody is not there to learn. And there's also the problem of the larger workplace culture and the business models that sometimes reduce security just to a cost center, some specialized area for experts to busy themselves in. And these are cultures that see security as a drag on the real business of the company. I actually had this challenge with a good friend of mine who works for a global organization where he's a senior security executive. We were talking about Intellectmap and what we do with our AI-powered cybersecurity training. And he responded, look, we're way too busy. Our seniors are way too busy. They don't have time for this kind of training. And he said, I've seen it often with our own in-house security training. I'm telling you, they're not going to take it. What do they need to know about all these different details and all these modules of cybersecurity training? I mean, you're talking about, for example, a module on password management, but they already have a password manager. What do they need to know about password cracking, for example? Well, anyway, you know what it all boiled down to, and what he was really telling me, that his is an organization that really doesn't value security at the culture level, because that's like the recruitment turndown at CIA, because there are some places where it's going to be really hard to embed cybersecurity learning, even at the leadership level. So I have to face that challenge. Which also brings me to a vital insight that I've gained across my career, across from CIA to Deutsche Bank's corporate security and business continuity group, to working for Neural IQ, today Ghost Secure, pitching US government prospective clients, even in Homeland Security consulting, where I engaged police chiefs from all across the US, and also hunting hidden assets of some of the world's most violent kleptocrats working for George Clooney's investigative NGO. Again and again and again, I've seen that the organizations that have the best security awareness are those that have the best risk leadership, that they are recognizing and rewarding their staff for risk leadership, where the C-suite walks the walk and talks the talk and put actual skin in the game. Take the example of a CIA station chief whose team foiled a major terrorist attack in Asia, and instead of the normal response of high fives and self-congratulations, he instead convened his team to spend all afternoon reviewing where things could have gone wrong, where they really just got lucky, and what were the lessons learned. That's risk leadership. Or there's a major US corporation that I know that probably employs more people than any other company in the US. And they invited a former boss of mine who was the chief of the Clandestine Information and Technology Office, what is today the Information Operations Center. They invited him after he left CIA to come to a 2-day security seminar with all their executive leadership. Again, that's really great risk leadership. And there's an IT security company that I know that turned an unfortunately successful pen test of a client of theirs where they were able to get into their network. And the client said, look, take this pen test as you're doing it, and film it, and turn it into an action video, add music, different camera angles, because let's face it, penetration test is pretty boring. And they made it into an exciting video, and then they showed it at a board meeting to stress how they were improving security. And then I look at the great security leadership at Deutsche Bank that, despite all its known public failings, I can tell you from when I was inside that corporate security world that we did things that very few other banks were doing as effectively at the time. And that was doing systematic crisis management exercises that would convene all kinds of individuals from the bank's back office personnel, bankers, regulators, the FBI, the New York Police Department, and we'd all get in a room and run through tabletop exercises that would really have people sweating it out, including folks on the line from Singapore, Mumbai, New York, London, Frankfurt. And that would build a real sense of resiliency and security psychology. I was the head of the red team at Deutsche Bank, where we modeled proactively threats to the bank's people, processes, and infrastructures. So my point here is that you can have the best security training methods and very unique ones like we have at Intellectmap, but I also need to have an engagement by the client's leadership. And I've been fortunate that a number of my clients have that mindset at the highest levels. They have that mindset to do training and to do it well. They're willing to engage the AI-powered training that allows us to spot, develop, assess, and recruit learners, and also to engage me as a coach, as someone who will reach out to those who have the most need, the weakest links in the security chain. Look, I've talked enough, so feel free to ask any questions, jump in, share stories of your own, push back. I'm all ears. Thanks a lot.
I have a question, Mark. So tell me about some of your most recent, some of your most interesting experiences while performing some of your missions.
Are you talking about back when I was at CIA?
I'd say something recent, something that the members would find very, very interesting. Maybe something obscure that that you've done.
Sure. So for me, one of the most interesting challenges is working with my clients' IT and cybersecurity teams that I need to recruit to my side when we're in the development and recruitment phase of acquiring a client, and also after we've been engaged. That's because there's always the risk that a CISO or one of the senior IT guys feels threatened, or maybe feels that we're going to be second guessing their work. There's a very important role for the CIA recruitment cycle to apply here in order to assess, develop, and recruit the IT teams to the adventure of cybersecurity knowledge discovery. And I do that by an attitude that totally respects them as persons and as subject matter experts in their domain and within their company. I make it very clear that I'm here to learn from them. I'm not a computer engineer or have an IT certification. Others at Intellectmap have those credentials. So my approach is to sincerely convince them that we're here to empower them, to show them that we'll offload their existing cybersecurity training and also other security responsibilities onto our shoulders in a partnership. This can be a challenge. And there are some times when I can immediately pick up the defensiveness in the room. And it's my job to diplomatically and with emotional intelligence deal with that understandable pushback by paying attention to the person, explaining very clearly what our processes are and keeping the lines of communication very open. It's also important to know that the results of their colleagues and their own assessments are not going to be seen at the granular level by their management. These assessment scores and quiz results are not ever going to be used by their management to put people on the spot or embarrass them or to use it in a performance appraisal report, as long as folks are actually taking the assessment and doing the training. And in the end, the CISOs or IT teams, they come to appreciate that they don't have to worry about monitoring dashboards, assigning campaigns, or being responsible for implementing training. Their attitude becomes, well, you guys come in, you do what you really do well, and that's a load off our back, and we trust you to do it well.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
We have a two-part question. So the first part is, can you talk more about the implementation of the CIA recruitment models? And then the second question was, can you speak more about your use of AI?
Okay, well, implementing the CIA recruitment model for me is always a continual process, both in delivering training, but also, as I just said, in targeting business prospects, assessing them and developing relationships, and then closing the deal, which is recruiting. So the SADR in cybersecurity training means offloading the spotting of weak learners, and especially those learners who need serious growth in their cybersecurity awareness and who are also higher risks of being targeted by malicious actors because of their access to sensitive company information. And I can spot them with the AI engine that is driving a 113 question assessment of their knowledge and access, and that is doing that in a spotting and assessing mode. Often, I come in after that and give a personalized coaching brief to select persons after their assessment. I introduce them to the multi-part online training and I launch them into the training. And that is the development and recruitment side. I can't stress enough the importance to a learner of knowing that they're dealing with a real person who respects them, learns from them, and enjoys training them. And the AI engine allows me to scale to determine who needs some personal coaching, when to intervene, and how to intervene based on specific topics in cybersecurity that they just don't seem to be understanding. And then as far as Intellect Security's use of AI, that's the work of Ronan. And it's a very technical coding approach that's not my area of work, but it's important to point out that behind the coding, there is upfront work that I've done along with Ronan to develop the questions and answers that the AI engine presents and processes. That was an initial learning process for me as well, since I had to develop a logical thought process of reasoning that took into account the wide variety of learners who'd be taking the assessment and the quizzes.
Okay, another two-part question. Which AI tools do you use the most? And is there a process to asking the most probing questions?
I'm going to defer on which AI tools we use the most, as that's Ronan's domain. But regarding developing probing questions, yes, there is a method and a process of creating these, as I just said. In fact, it's been a great learning process for me personally, as I've had to delve very deeply into all the various cybersecurity domains that we cover in our modules and in our assessment, to do additional research on top of my existing knowledge, to learn from Ronan, and then start putting all this together. I had to develop questions that were understandable but challenging, whose answers weren't necessarily obvious, whose logic flow required the learner to actually pause and think about the question and at the same time not be overwhelmed, and to avoid trick questions or gotcha questions or irrelevant questions. So once that's done, it's over to Ronan for a deep review and challenges like, hey, what were you trying to say here? Wouldn't it flow better if you worded this question this way? Further refinement, and then off to the AI coding.
Excellent.
Crypto Jones, I don't think we can answer that question. It was about what lessons from the CIA do you apply to your civilian life? Maybe that would be the last question, if Mark is willing to answer that.
Okay, last question. Well, to answer that fully, I'd have to write an entire book. But let me share just 2 lessons from the CIA that I apply to my life outside the intelligence world. The first is that I was taught to look at reality with the knowledge that there's always a story behind the story and not to blindly accept appearances. You only have a keyhole view of situations and people, so don't jump to conclusions without digging a bit deeper. Continually ask questions and take the time to use the right mental tools and reasoning to analyze the answers that you're getting to those questions in order to identify the best course of action and make wise conclusions. So that's the first lesson. The second big lesson that I learned is that there really is a shadow hand that, for better or for worse, often does influence events and even history. I mean, look, it's not an issue of being paranoid or conspiratorial, but rather knowing that there is a shadow world of good guys and a lot of bad guys who are operating all around us. And yet most people are completely unaware of what they're up to, or at least not until it's too late. I mean, this is not only a hidden world where governments and their spies operate, but it's also peopled with organized crime groups, narco traffickers, and the vast network of their enablers and facilitators like tax lawyers, real estate agents, bankers, many others. One of the silver linings to the political chaos of the last few years is that Americans have come to learn in a very public and often, sadly, partisan way about the hidden covert operations of foreign countries like Russia, China, Iran, and others who are targeting the U.S. 24/7, 365. I mean, personally, for me, that's why it's so shocking that these threats that the U.S. media have exposed are being dismissed by some of our leaders, media organizations, and pundits who really should know better. I spent years as a counterintelligence officer going up against these threats to the U.S. and our allies' governments and critical infrastructures, and I know that we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg of what our country is up against. So thanks again.
Cool. That looks like we are wrapping it up. I'm trying to find one more question that was possibly related, but it was about developing the security mindset. Basically saying a lot of people are looking for advice on how to get into cybersecurity, and having that mindset is key. And some of us know we need to develop that mindset more. That's probably more for a presentation that we had just Monday with Alyssa Miller, and it talks about her transition from barista to InfoSec professional and developing that mindset. So that's more for that topic. If there's anything, Anne's been very has been very active with the questions. It's it talks about business models and services that you offer, and I will send you Mark's information. That would be something that we could ask offline. I was just trying to get it because I just saw it come up. But I want to thank you all for coming out. Mark, do you have any final words to put out?
Yeah, so a couple of final words. First, I want to say something about improving your security mindset. because it's so important across our professional and also personal life. I mean, think of this mindset as if you were looking at a puzzle or an optical illusion or those pictures, that have hidden faces in them. I mean, in other words, looking at the ordinary, in the case of cybersecurity, a laptop, a password, an email, a phone call, a wireless hotspot, and imagine how this beneficial technology could be turned around and cause you harm. I mean, that's the security mindset. Ask yourself, what's the hidden side to this technology and these services that the services that I take for granted? For example, are my apps on my smartphone tracking all my geographic locations? Does it matter? Okay, how could this information be exploited? I mean, in my view, it's really about modifying your brain processes and realizing that our brain needs to be trained to think about security threats in a different way. Like, I can't say enough about the books and monthly newsletter and blog of Bruce Schneier. They're just tremendous resources to develop such a security mindset. And if you don't already receive his newsletter, I really would recommend subscribing to it. And his seminal 2016 paper on the psychology of security, man, that should be required reading for everyone in the workforce. Its insights are also very helpful in understanding risk perceptions across society, including the COVID-19 pandemic or terrorism and other threats the media covers. So finally, thanks to all who joined today, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me and introduce yourself. Let's get to know each other. For me, that's one of the big benefits of conferences, in that you can get to know people and deepen your own learning and your own network. So thanks.
All right. We want to thank everyone for coming out and joining us. We definitely want to thank Mark Danner and Intellectmap for providing us with this great presentation. We will post it. We will send it to everyone along with Mark's contact information. Please, 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 if you have any other further questions or comments, definitely get in touch with Mark.